In today's video, we're diving into a story that begins the same way many life changing stories do. Not with a dramatic event, not with a shocking betrayal, but with a silence so deep that it slowly begins to consume everything around it. Sometimes the wounds that hurt the most aren't created by harsh words or explosive arguments. Sometimes they're created by the absence of those things. Sometimes a relationship doesn't break in a single moment. Instead, it fades little by little, day after day, until one morning you wake up and realize you're sharing a house with someone who feels miles away. For Emily, that realization didn't come all at once. It arrived quietly. The digital clock in the kitchen displayed 12:07 in the morning. The faint blue glow illuminated the dark room, while the rest of the house remained still. Emily sat alone at the dining table, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. She wasn't drinking it. She wasn't even looking at it. She was waiting. The meal she had prepared hours earlier sat untouched in front of her. The food had lost its warmth. The carefully arranged plate no longer looked appetizing. Everything about it reflected the same thing she felt inside: forgotten. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. Occasionally, a floorboard creaked somewhere in the hallway. The sounds were ordinary, but tonight they felt louder because there was nothing else to compete with them. No conversation, no laughter, no shared moments, just silence. Emily stared at the front door. She told herself she wouldn't wait. She had promised herself that tonight would be different. She would eat alone. She would watch television. She would go to sleep early. She wouldn't check the time every few minutes. And yet here she was once again, waiting. Not because she enjoyed it, not because she expected anything extraordinary, but because somewhere inside her, a small piece of hope still existed. The front door finally opened. The sound instantly pulled her attention away from her thoughts. David stepped inside. His shoulders drooped beneath the weight of another exhausting day. His tie hung loosely around his neck. His face carried the expression of a man who had been fighting deadlines and responsibilities for far too long. Emily sat up slightly. For a brief moment, hope returned. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe he'd notice the dinner. Maybe he'd ask about her day. Maybe he'd sit down beside her like he used to. Instead, David walked past the table. "You didn't have to wait up," he said softly. Without stopping, he kissed the top of her head and continued toward the staircase. Seconds later, his footsteps disappeared upstairs. And just like that, the moment was over. Emily remained seated. The silence returned. Only now it felt heavier. Years ago, she used to love hearing that front door open. Back then, David would rush inside with energy in his voice. He'd tell her stories about his day before even taking off his jacket. He'd pull her close and make her laugh. He'd look at her as if she were the most important person in the world. Now those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life. The man upstairs was still her husband. Yet somehow he felt like a stranger. The next morning wasn't much different. By the time Emily entered the kitchen, David was already dressed for work. His laptop bag rested against the counter. His phone occupied most of his attention. Emails flashed across the screen faster than she could keep track of them. Emily quietly began preparing breakfast. Eggs sizzled in the pan. Coffee brewed nearby. Everything followed the same routine they had repeated hundreds of times before. "Coffee's ready," she said. "Thanks." He barely glanced up. A few distracted bites later, he checked his watch. "I'm running late." Within seconds, he grabbed his keys. The front door closed, and Emily found herself standing alone once again. The sentence she wanted to say never left her lips. The question she wanted to ask remained trapped inside her. She listened to the fading sound of his car driving away. Then she looked down at the untouched breakfast. Without saying a word, she scraped it into the trash. The rest of the morning drifted by slowly. She washed dishes, cleaned counters, organized things that didn't need organizing, anything to fill the emptiness. After her shower, she sat on the couch and stared at the living room. The house felt enormous. Not because it was large, but because loneliness makes every room feel bigger. Every hallway seemed longer. Every minute felt slower. By noon, the walls themselves felt suffocating. Emily stood and grabbed her car keys. "I need to get out of here," she whispered. The farmer's market was exactly what she needed. The moment she arrived, she felt surrounded by life. People laughed, children ran between booths, friends greeted one another, vendors enthusiastically called out prices. Fresh flowers added color to every corner. The atmosphere felt alive in a way her home no longer did. For the first time all day, Emily smiled. Not because anything extraordinary happened, simply because she felt connected to the world again. She wandered between stalls at a relaxed pace. Fresh bread, homemade candles, seasonal fruits, small handcrafted decorations. Each booth offered a tiny distraction from the loneliness she carried. Then she saw him. At first, he was simply another stranger in the crowd, a tall man standing beside a fruit vendor. But something about him caught her attention. Maybe it was the calm way he moved. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't appear rushed. Or maybe it was because he seemed fully present in a world where everyone else was distracted. He held a peach in one hand, studying it carefully as though there was nowhere else he needed to be. Emily found herself glancing his way twice, then 3 times. Eventually, he noticed. Instead of looking away, he smiled. Not an awkward smile, not a flirtatious smile, just a genuine one. "Good peaches today," he said casually. Emily laughed softly. "They really are." The conversation lasted only a few minutes. They talked about fruit, the weather, favorite vendors, nothing significant, nothing personal. And yet, when Emily walked away, something felt different. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't attraction alone. It wasn't excitement. It was something simpler. For the first time in a very long time, she felt noticed, seen, acknowledged. As she sat inside her car afterward, her hands rested on the steering wheel while her thoughts replayed the interaction. Why did that conversation affect her so much? It was just a stranger, just a few minutes, nothing more. Yet her heart felt strangely lighter. That night, David came home late again. Emily ate dinner alone again. The television filled the room with background noise. Several times she considered mentioning the man from the market, not because the conversation mattered, but because she wanted to share something, anything. However, she already knew how the exchange would go. David would nod, offer a short response, then return his attention elsewhere. So she kept the story to herself. And somewhere deep inside, a door she didn't even realize existed began to open. A door that would eventually change everything. The days that followed felt different, though Emily refused to admit why. She told herself she was simply enjoying the fresh air. She told herself she liked supporting local vendors. She told herself she needed an excuse to leave the house. But deep down, she knew the truth. Every time she returned to the market, a small part of her hoped she would see him again. And eventually she did. This time he noticed her first. "Emily," he called with an easy smile. The fact that he remembered her name surprised her more than it should have. Most people barely listen these days. Most conversations felt rushed, forgettable. Yet somehow this man remembered. They spent nearly an hour talking that afternoon. What began as casual conversation slowly turned into something deeper. Books, music, childhood memories, dreams they had once chased, dreams they had abandoned. For the first time in years, Emily felt herself opening up naturally. There was no effort, no pretending, no carefully choosing every word. Marcus listened, really listened. The way people listen when they genuinely care about understanding someone. That alone felt dangerous. Weeks passed. Their conversations became a regular part of Emily's life. Not because she planned for it, not because she intended to cross any boundaries, but because every interaction filled a space that had been empty for far too long. At home, things remained the same. David left early, returned late, worked through dinner, answered emails during conversations, apologized often, changed nothing. Emily tried more than once to reach him. One evening, she finally gathered the courage to speak honestly. "Do you ever feel like we're becoming strangers?" she asked quietly. David looked up from his plate, confused, almost surprised by the question. "I don't know," he replied after a moment. "Work has just been crazy lately." Then he returned to eating. That was it. No follow-up, no concern, no discussion, just another conversation left unfinished. Something inside Emily broke that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for her to feel it. The following week, Marcus texted her a simple message, checking in, asking how she was doing. Emily stared at her phone for several minutes before replying. The truth was uncomfortable. A man who barely knew her seemed more interested in her thoughts than the man she had married. That realization frightened her, yet she couldn't ignore it. Their messages continued, friendly at first, then more personal. They shared stories, memories, dreams, regrets. The kind of conversations that create emotional closeness. The kind of conversations that make time disappear. Eventually, Marcus asked her to meet for coffee. Emily knew she should decline. She knew the line was becoming blurry, but she also knew she hadn't felt this alive in years. So she agreed. The cafe was small and quiet. Warm sunlight filtered through large windows. The atmosphere felt peaceful, safe. For hours they talked. Not about anything extraordinary, just life. The things people carry inside but rarely share. The things that matter. Emily laughed more during those few hours than she had laughed in months, maybe years. And when the afternoon ended, neither of them seemed eager to leave. As Marcus walked her to her car, the silence between them felt different. Charged, meaningful. "Can I see you again?" he asked softly. Emily looked away. Part of her wanted to say no. Part of her knew she should. But another part was tired of feeling invisible. Tired of feeling forgotten. Tired of living a life that no longer felt like her own. "I don't know," she whispered. Marcus nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. That night, Emily barely slept. She stared at the ceiling while questions raced through her mind. When had things gotten this bad? When had loneliness become her normal? When had she stopped feeling like herself? The next morning, instead of calling Marcus, she made a different decision. She sat down across from David. For once, she refused to let the conversation end early. "We need to talk." David immediately sensed something different. He closed his laptop, set down his phone, and listened. Really listened. For the first time in years. Emily told him everything. Not about Marcus. Not yet. But about her loneliness, her sadness, her feeling of being invisible inside her own marriage. At first, David looked defensive, then confused, then something else. Pain. Because for the first time, he realized how much damage had been done. The conversation lasted hours, longer than any conversation they had shared in years. There were tears, apologies, difficult truths, uncomfortable silences, but there was also honesty. Real honesty. The kind that can either end a relationship or save it. Over the following weeks, things didn't magically improve. There was no perfect movie ending. Healing never works that way. Instead, there were small changes. David started coming home earlier. They ate dinner together. They took evening walks. They talked, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes emotionally, but they talked. For the first time in years, both of them were trying. One afternoon, Marcus sent another message. A simple invitation. Emily stared at the screen for a long time. She cared about him. That was the truth. He had entered her life during a season when she felt completely alone. He had reminded her what it felt like to be seen, to matter. And she would always be grateful for that. But she also understood something important. Marcus wasn't the solution to her pain. He was the symptom of it. The real problem had existed long before they met. The emptiness, the distance, the silence. Those things had been growing inside her marriage for years. And now she finally had a choice. Run from the problem or face it. Slowly, Emily typed a response. She thanked Marcus for his kindness, for his friendship, for reminding her she was still capable of feeling alive. But she also told him she needed to focus on repairing her marriage because regardless of how uncertain the future seemed, she wanted to know she had truly tried. Marcus understood. His reply was short, respectful, and full of grace. "I hope you find happiness, Emily." She smiled sadly as she read the message. Then she put her phone away. Months later, Emily stood in front of an easel in the spare bedroom. A paintbrush rested in her hand. Sunlight spilled through the window. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint. For the first time in years, she was creating again. Not because someone told her to, not because someone noticed, but because she remembered who she was. Behind her, David appeared in the doorway. He watched quietly for a moment. "That's beautiful," he said. Emily turned. He wasn't looking at the painting. He was looking at her. Really looking at her. The way he used to. The way she had missed for so long. She smiled. Not because everything was perfect, not because every wound had healed, but because both of them were finally present. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Not with grand gestures, not with dramatic promises, but with two people choosing, day after day, to truly see each other again. The truth is that loneliness can exist even inside a crowded room. And attention from someone new can feel powerful when you've spent years feeling invisible. But lasting happiness rarely comes from escaping our problems. It comes from confronting them, from speaking the truths we've been afraid to say, from rebuilding what we've neglected, and from remembering that relationships don't usually end in a single moment. They fade through neglect, just as they are rebuilt through effort, one conversation, one choice, one day at a time. And for Emily and David, that day became the beginning of a brand new chapter. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, real is exactly what we need.